the ability of Russia try to expand and try to invade those countries to begin with, which is why we exist to begin with. What that means is that what comes first is the Russian expansion, and NATO exists to counter it. Why exactly Russia expansion happened? Sarah explained to you a lot of reasons, i.e. because of the fact that they have a lot of mineral resources. For some reason, Wesley just suggests what exactly resources that exist within those area. It is a mineral that exists, i.e. like the rocks and also the golds and that exist within the area. It is the fact that there's already a gas pipeline that exists within Crimea and Ukraine that allows Russia to be able to have a lot of resources to begin with. All of those countries literally have a lot of gases, a lot of oils that Russia can tap into. That is why Russia wants to claim over it. But second and more importantly is the historical context that I already explained to you, because they were part of the of like Soviet Union. But third and more importantly is the fact that the ability for Russia to curb all of those countries going into the West means that they want to ensure that all those countries stay within the Soviet Union ideology to begin with. That is why like Russia will continuously try to expand to begin with. And I want to point out, right, the existence of NATO alone will already make Russia aggressive. That means that even if like you do not give this membership, Russia will still be aggressive regardless, because they preemptively try to ensure that all those countries do not go into the West to begin with. That's why Russia will invade. What is exactly the response to us? The first things that we heard coming from Ernsi is to suggest that Russia will not attack because Putin wants to protect their own bureaucracy. One, I want to point out the oligarchs within Russia already want to invade all these countries because of their belief of Soviet Union. I don't know why exactly, for some reason, the bureaucrats do not want to invade. Two, and more importantly, Putin wants to see like he is the strong arm or the iron person. I don't know the term that basically let's say like he's a strong person that do not like succumb to like the ideology of the West, which means that they are more likely going to invade on the side of on that side of the house simply because of the, not on that. Basically, Russia will still invade regardless. The second thing that they suggest is that Russia is poor. One, I want to point out that Russia is poor is just the context of 2023. This is after the invasion of like the Ukraine where they're losing the war itself. But two, and more importantly, if it is true that Russia is poor, that means that regardless you give the membership or not, they're not going to invade regardless because they do not have the money. I take their logic and prove to you why exactly their argument doesn't work. The third thing that we hear is that the reasons why exactly Russia are aggressive is because of the NATO expansion and enlargement. I want to point out that is not the case, right? Firstly, I just want to point out how exactly the NATO enlargement works, because it is not just easy like the NATO just giving out memberships like a flyers, right? It is when the country applies to NATO in order to be part of NATO. Then when the NATO decide, that's where like NATO will decide whether or not they want to give this membership to this country. What that means is that all of the country that exists within the Eastern Europe that applies to NATO believe that they are actually in a very huge threat. Why is that the case? The first is because of the threat of Russia potentially could invade them because they think that Russia want to reclaim over their land again. The second thing is that they probably fear that the ideology of the communists will actually infiltrate within their area. The third thing is that they probably want to distance themselves from the Russia. All of these things prove to you why exactly that they apply to NATO. What that means is that if you do not give the membership to these countries, not only you give them a huge insecurity or they feel like a huge threat towards them, but more importantly, that means that they are less likely going to believe the West is going to protect them in the future. That is very harmful because that means that you remove all the trust that exists towards the West or towards the West from these Eastern Europe countries that is necessary to curb the expansion of the Russia, which is why that is very, very harmful on that side of the house. Before I conclude why exactly Russia will standardize, I'll take that POI. Faster. Okay, guys, I don't have enough time. Okay, the second thing I want to argue is that why exactly then the countries will actually backside. Wesley tells you that for some reason, like this country, like Russia, will infiltrate and stuff like that. I think they've missed what our argument is. Our argument is to explain that when all of these countries that neighbors Russia still have some form of like Russia influence. The fact that there are some people who actually live in the border of the Russia, they still believe in Russia ideology, either because they were part of Russia before, or they were the one who moved from Russia to that country, or because they simply just believe in Putin. Why is this important? Because all of these groups of people are more likely going to infiltrate this and try to create revolution within this country itself. And the reasons why it's more likely going to happen on that side of the house is simply because of the fact that when you reject all of this membership, that means that it gave the idea that the West is actually like ignoring this country. This is very harmful for a couple of reasons. One is means that you are allows them to be able to have a revolution against their own country. But two, and more importantly, you're able to spread this ideology through politics. politics. And this is why we see a lot of like this country continuously backslide. For example, countries such as Belarus are able to backslide because they believe in the ideology of Russia. We think when you put them within NATO, that means that it gives more incentive for them to have relationship with the Western countries, which means that you are able to ensure the democracy exists within the country. Why is this the case? The first is because when you have a relationship with the Western country, you remove the ability for them to have to rely on Russia to begin with. Two, and more importantly, that also means that you're able to entrench and also keep their democracy institution more strong on our side of the house, which means that you are more likely ensure that this country are unlikely to actually backslide. What's the conclusion here? On that side of the house, they're not able to prevent the Russia antagonization, but we prove to you the benefits of security and also ensures the institution will be protected. For all those reasons, it is clear opposition.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Deputy Leader of Opposition. Moving on, I would like to call upon the Government Whip, Mr. Vignesh, to continue proposing the motion on behalf of the government team. Please welcome.
Thank you.
Hello? Okay.
Hello, am I audible and am I visible?
Yes, you are.
Just grab my last note. Can I work yours? PI is in chat, but I will ask you for one as well, so it's okay. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the biggest failure of opposition was on two key parts, panel. The first, to stay consistent with their characterizations and line of argument, but secondarily in the characterization, this insane characterization of Russia that we're hearing, that somehow Russia cares about non-existent resources in non-existent places owned by non-existent people, that somehow Russia will act in a way that it has not shown any historical precedent towards, but also in the characterization of NATO, which is fundamentally flawed. Wesley literally gave you a history lesson, so I hope the other Wesley in his call takes note of that and gives us due credit. But before I get into why necessarily we win the debate, I get on the two key issues of the debate. I want to very quickly make a few strategic call-outs. The biggest call-out comes from Deputy Leader of Opposition when he creates tension within his own case. Because he says, and I'm not even like, I'm going verbatim here, that Eastern European countries like Russia a lot. There's a sentiment towards Russia, but at the same breath say that the only way towards getting these resources is by going to war with these countries, invading these countries, getting resources. So which is it? Is it these countries' trend towards liking Russia, which was the claim from the start, and that's what Wesley had to respond to, or is it that Russia needs to invade them to doing these things? If it is true that it is sentiment towards Russia isn't enough to like have some level of bilateral or unilateral trade even between these nations for these non-existent, again, resources, I think the burden then falls on opposition as to proving why an invasion and a putting of troops into the ground is the only exclusive way towards getting these things. Because if you say that these things are true, it is unclear to me why you can't just have a trade deal and do it. It is unclear to me why it needs to be to the levels of aggressiveness that they're characterizing. Again, I think that this is just because they are wonky characterization of Russia. But the second is on this entire insane idea of oligarch incentives to want to like create a Soviet Union again. Panel, which oligarch has ever wanted to restate the Soviet Union? Like, I support Chelsea, panel. Roman Abramovich back in the day wanted money, one thing only, and he wanted money. Most oligarchs in Russia want money. Maybe then your claim is that they want to invade the states for the non-existent minerals that they're talking about. I've already explained to you in the earlier rebuttal why that is unlikely to happen. The point where they concede that this is something that these nations have a trend towards Russia and they like Russia a lot. I think that if you want to prove some level of additional marginal utility as to how you can get these things by invading them, you need to prove how A, that doesn't lead to a destruction of resources, which is counterintuitive towards what you want, because you need to wipe out the entire fucking country if you want to get these resources. But B, they then need to explain to me why it's the tipping point, even if you can guarantee these things, why Putin would want to go into these nations and do these things if you can just make a trade deal. I also want to talk about the entire idea of Russia as an aggressor. The very quick response to this is, if you listen to Wesley and his speech, it already show you why Russia isn't going to be aggressive in nature towards these nations, rather responsive towards the aggressions that come from NATO, NATO, but I'm going to deal with this later on in my speech and explain why, even if that is true, because I'm a really charitable man panel, I'm going to explain why even that is true, they're likely going to win this debate. So before I get into the issues, I'm going to be really, really charitable to Op today, because I'm feeling really charitable. Today is Sunday, I guess, I don't know. So let's be charitable towards the side of opposition. Let's go one by one. Firstly, Sarah says that the West's reaction towards these things, NATO's reaction towards Russia, does not matter, and Russia will always react in an extremely harmful way. Let's assume that to be true for a second, although they never actually proved it, and say that it does happen. Why is our comparative still better than the side of opposition? Number one, owing to their own characterization, if Russia is super aggressive, they've never actually proven to us how necessarily NATO being more aggressive and more on Russia's doorstep, being the nosy neighbor with a gun as Wesley characterizes and arming their squirrels, is suddenly going to make Russia back down. They never actually explained that intuitive logical link as to why it will work. But again, secondarily then, and this is independent of wanting to buy into the analysis of if Russia is aggressive as a state, is that if you buy into our analysis that Russia feels threatened by you going to a doorstep, by virtue of that, they are more likely to invade into these states. The point where US NATO act more and more aggressive. Meaning, if on scale you are to evaluate this argument, you need to credit it towards us that we get less conflict. The point where we actually take actions and preventative measures towards Russia as a wrongfully characterized, extremely aggressive actor. But secondarily, then, I also want to talk about the greater protection for NATO members and the NATO pact and Article 5, which Sarah talks about. Even if that is true, this is not an actor debate. This is a this House regrets debate. We tell you that the point where that is true, and you get one or two nations from Eastern Europe to join, all you have to do is buy into you have to somewhat buy into the analysis that we give you, and also buy into the analysis that Russia is a really aggressive actor, which OP gives you, which then tells you that they're likely going to invade every other country that isn't a member of NATO, because if their claim is that it becomes the be-all, say-all deterrent from Russia invading you, the point where you're a member, it means that every other neighboring state is now going to be invaded by Russia by virtue of the logic of opposition. I think that is a world that is worse on the comparative than what we want to posit. We win on that as well. But let's say that the oligarchs care, right? That's something else that they wanted to talk about. Even if that is true, why would you want to invade? Like, if they care about like Soviet Union or whatever, or they care about money, which is the more likely characterization, it's still unclear why you need to have the tipping point of war. Never is an actual thing that's actually exclusively proven. Maybe it's some semblance of a proxy state or some semblance of a Russian influence into the states. Wesley has already told you why it doesn't see that's bad. Before I get into the two issues in the debate and why we win on both those issues and a bit of weighing, I'll take a POI, sure.
Why exactly Finland applied to enter NATO?
Finland isn't a part of the Eastern European states that we're talking about in the scope of this debate, because I think that from Ernst's speech up until now, a lot of it has been characterized as like states that are involved by Russia. Your argument is also contingent on the states that are involved by Russia. Finland wants to apply. We don't really care. I don't think that Russia is likely going to see that, owing to your characterization of like wanting to reform the Soviet Union. I don't think they're going to care that much. But even if they do apply, we don't see that that's a bad. Wesley already told you this in his speech. Even if Finland wants to apply, and even if Russia cares about that, so what? Them implying and them getting accepted and NATO trying to form some relations with them is not the same thing. I'm going to go into the two issues in the debate. Number one, on how Russia will react and why that's important we need it around. I think that this is important because a lot of the arguments, unlike ours, are actually contingent that Russia will act in the way that they characterize. I think the point where we prove that, and I explain how we prove it and why it's winning, we take out any harm analysis that comes from their side. All they said is that Russia invade these countries for non-existent minerals owned by non-existent people. What we said, we gave you a nuanced analysis right from Ernst's speech as to what the incentive structures of Russia in particular are and how necessarily they will operate. Secondarily, we also told you that in response is, if you want to believe that Russia is aggressive, as they say, and this came out in my speech, then it's unclear why invasion becomes a tipping point. Thirdly, Wesley also explained to you a nuanced history of what NATO is supposed to be. The weighing then is simple. Even if we can't guarantee how Russia will act as an actor, we've already explained to you how the comparative on our world becomes much better. Even if you believe that the nation states of NATO now have better protection from Russia owing to the protection, we still explain to you how every other member state becomes better in the comparative. I think for the reason that we generate better stability within the region as compared to the side of opposition, we immediately win this debate. Never prouder to propose.
Thank you, Mr. Government Whip. Moving on, I would like to invite the opposition whip, Mr. Adam, to present your arguments. Please welcome.
Before I start my speech, can I ask if the speaker, later when you share the time, right, can you just mute the bell so that it wouldn't disrupt the audio?
Sure. Right.
Thank you. I applaud Wesley for spending almost 5 minutes trying to justify Russia looking like the third grader but getting bullied by the cool kids, which is the Western powers, right? Even if that's true, that means that you're making Xi Jinping also looking like the victim, right? Because whatever that Xi Jinping does is a response towards whatever the US has been doing. So whatever that Russia and China did was all justified because it's an act of aggression that was made by the Western powers. In a world where all of this is intuitive, we're doomed for. I'm going to give you like 2 issues later on why. First of all, we win on a principal clash, which is something that came out in Ernst's speech that became their metric. And secondly, why we win on a clash of curbing Russian influence. But I have 2 pieces of clarification I want to make in this debate today. Firstly, is in response to Vignesh's speech about why NATO's involvement would make Russia scared and would be the tipping point. The reason is simple. Look at Ukraine when Russia invaded Ukraine. The reason why Ukraine was able to stay alive right now, because of only 1 or 2 members of NATO actually helping them and providing them with aid, which is what Haikal said in his speech. Obviously, the inclusion of the entire force of NATO becoming the strongest military on earth would obviously make Russia shit their pants because of the fact that they have a larger degree of influence where they can have more supply of resources and military power. The second clarification I want to make is the fact that they've been downplaying the need for these regions because of the fact that they say, these regions are just nothing one, there's no resources. So it's just a waste of time if NATO were to give memberships in the first place. We've already proven to you in 2 speeches that these regions, even though are small, but collectively they are strong. Why? Because of the fact that Russia needed these states, because of the resources they have. Collectively, that's a lot of resources for the gas pipelines, for the mineral resources. Secondly, these are the same states that Russia will use to put in their military bases so they can grow the number of military that they have. And thirdly, and this is also the answer to the reason why Russia invaded Crimea as an additional response, is to say that because these states provide beneficial economic trade routes for Russia, in order for Russia to basically gain a lot of economical benefits. All of this just shows to prove that the inclusion of these states within Russia would, in a way, make Russia's influence grow, not only in terms of their military power, but also in terms of their soft power and as well as their economic superpower. Because of that, these states are just not one to be messing with. That's the net benefit of having or just giving them NATO memberships at the end of the day. First issue then, on why we win on the principal clash. This is a response towards the first argument that came in from Ernst's speech. The first reason they said, the reason why it's principally unjustified is because of the fact that you have NATO membership, then it sends a message for Russia to aggress. We've proven to you in 2 different speeches on the reason why Russia would have aggressed anyways. Number 1 is because of the growing trend of the global south. Anything that the Western influence does now obviously means that you have the global south to become the counter narrative for it. And that's the reason why Russia, China, and a lot of other countries are growing their influence because they have to counter towards America. So regardless, they will still invade because they need to grow their influence. The second reason why they will still do it regardless is because of economic traits. That's the reason why they invaded Crimea, and also that's one of the reasons why they invaded Ukraine as well. And thirdly is the reason where the whole historical warfare actually exists, right? The reason why Finland wanted to join NATO precisely because of the fact that Finland used to be part of the Soviet Union, and because Russia invaded Ukraine, it made Finland scared, and that's the reason why they needed to be inside NATO, because they needed to feel safe. Wesley, please don't do that face. You're a judge. The second thing that they proved in their speech was they said it was unstrategic to have NATO membership within these countries. It's much better to give them aid when they're outside of the membership. I think this is just counterintuitive, right? Because the only way for you to defend more on these regions is by including them within NATO, because you can trigger Article 5, which is the collective defense that is good for NATO in general. The third thing was in regards to Western influence. We've already proven to you that Western influence is good because particularly they're part of the West. All of this just shows to prove that their principal argument don't stand. What do we then provide under this regard? We say that we fulfill NATO's purpose, right? Because regardless of whether Russia would have aggressed even more or not, we're there to protect them because these regions, we're there to protect them from Russian influence in these regions. And the reason why this is important is because this is more than government's soft stance on just NATO having purpose, right? Because they say, well, sure, NATO exists to like curb Russia's influence, but we can do so by giving aid. We can trigger Article 5, and we can also become the alternative to Russia. The conclusion here is that since government wants to protect these regions regardless, we don't know the scale of benefits that government provide. Sure, this House regrets motion, but they still have the high burden to prove why their counterfactual is likely going to be better in a world where they don't join NATO memberships at the end of the day. For all those reasons, we win on the principal clash. Before I move on, are there any POIs? 3, 2, 1. Okay, great. Second issue then, on why we get to curb Russian influence and why this is important. What Sarah argued in her speech is that there's a growing number of Russian influence even within these regions. And government's response to this was just by simply saying, oh, if these countries are applying for the membership in the first place, then obviously the Russian influence isn't an issue. This is something that was brought on by Vignesh. The reason why this is not the point, panel, and this basically like simplifies the case coming from the side of Sarah and just grossly misrepresents is because of the fact that in wartime, civilians helping Russian military is one that is dangerous. These are the same people on the ground who probably provide some form of asylum or help towards these Russian militaries to basically make sure that they can still survive another day. And because of this, because of the response of the civilians on the ground actually, have some form of ties towards Russia, that's the reason why the state of these countries applied for membership, because of the fact they want to counterbalance the power that Russia has even within these two regions. So obviously, government didn't successfully take down Sarah's point on proving why there are some form of Russian influence even within these regions, and that's the reason why this is so important. How do we then counter this problem, right? We say that we want to be the alternative towards Russia. And the reason why this is important, because apart from Russia's military that is losing, we can first the reason why Russia can still survive if there was some form of Russian influence is because of the fact that we can rely on the allies to stay alive, and also because of the fact that we can curb all of this together by giving this membership. We give them the economical traits that NATO have that can be provided to these areas. We can give them the development that they actually want. On top of that, we give them the assurance that they are protected under the strongest military on earth, which is just NATO in general, right? The conclusion here is that the West is suffering. The region itself right now is suffering because of the fact that Russia's invasion in Ukraine is one that is bad. So this is about reducing Russia's influence in Europe. And obviously because of this, we want to make sure that Europe can actually stay afloat, apart from the fact that you are relying on Russia as a whole. So for all those reasons, we just proven to you why Russia is A, likely going to still do this aggression regardless, and B, why NATO's inclusion in these areas is one that is the utmost important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Opposition Whip, for your speech. To proceed with the next agenda, we will now continue our debate session for this round with the reply speech session. The reply speech shall be delivered first by the opposition team. Therefore, without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Haikal to deliver his speech and conclude their debate. Please welcome.
Checking on my order. Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two questions I want to answer in this speech. Will Russia be aggressive on that side of the house? And secondly, why exactly membership is really necessary in regards of whether or not Russia will invade? Firstly, that whether or not Russia is actually aggressive on that side of the house, I want to point out that they, for some reason, just asserted that Russia are not aggressive and Russia will only retaliate if, for some reason, NATO invade or try to take into membership. First thing I want to observe here is that if it is true that Russia doesn't really care about all those countries and they do not want to reclaim back all those countries, why do they really care if NATO decided to give membership to those countries? It's not like NATO is going to do anything, right? NATO is just giving up membership and bringing them to have agreement. We just want to have a diplomatic relationship with each other. I don't know why Russia will get triggered if the argument is that Russia is not that aggressive. It is more likely because Russia cares about those countries, and the reason is because, as Sarah and Adam and me explained to you, is that all of these countries were part of Soviet Union once, which means that Russia potentially felt like those countries are necessary for them, and they really want to reclaim back those countries, or at the very least keep them within their influence. So what that means is that even if NATO does not expand their membership, Russia are more likely going to try to ensure that those people are still within their influence and within their power. They are more likely going to expand, maybe not militarily, but through influence. But secondly, Here's where we really takes the debate. Is when we give you 9 analyses to prove to you why exactly Russia is going to actually invade other countries. At best, it was dismissed by the other side by just saying, what resources? Where is these resources? How exactly are you going to use it? Oligarch doesn't care about those things. Firstly, those are not enough responses because it wasn't substantiated, nor there was analyzed. But two, and more importantly, all of the analysis that we give to you explain why exactly the incentive of Russia to at the very least ensure that they're able to spread their influence and able to actually control all of those countries to begin with, which means that Russia will continuously be aggressive, either A, whether try to do it militarily, and we've seen this happen with Crimea even before we offered the membership towards Ukraine, but two, and more importantly, either through influence. Let's assume that Russia aggression is very 50-50 in this debate, even though we give more analysis to prove why exactly they are more likely going to invade regardless. If it is true that Russia aggression, it is 50-50, at that point, we should actually ensure the security of these countries. Because what we explained to you is that if we're not sure that Russia are more likely going to invade this country, at the very least, we should give them protection and deterrence. Because we explained to you that the Article 5 is the strongest weapon in order to create deterrence against Russia, because Russia is unlikely going to actually invade a country if they know that they're going to trigger the Article 5, and that means that all NATO countries will actually invade them. But second, and more importantly, is the fact that the agreement of NATO itself ensures the protection and also the increase of military within the country itself, means that they're able to defend themselves even when Russia attack them. Third, and more importantly, is the fact that it allows us to have a Western influence within the country to counterback the communist influence that continuously backside those countries into worse states. So that means that even if whether or not Russia is going to be aggressive or not, this is already a huge benefit because of the fact that we're able to ensure the security of those countries to begin with. I want to point out, we already take out their case at the point where we already proved to you that Russia aggression doesn't really matter in this debate. What exactly also widen our margin? The first that we explained to you is that Russia are able to infiltrate those countries with their ideologies. This is how we see a lot of Russian diplomat and the people themselves are able to control the country from within, simply because of the fact that all of those people are able to come into those countries because they're near with Russia. The comparative that we suggest to you, when the country itself already have NATO, that means that Russia either A will be more likely to be scared against try to infiltrate those countries, but two, and more importantly, we're able to ensure that the Western institution within the country will be much stronger, which means that we're able to protect this country. The conclusion in this debate is very simple. Even if Russia is not going to invade, we give them security, and that's inherently a benefit that they cannot claim on that side of the house.
Thank you to the representative from the opposition team for the reply speech. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Wesley from the government team to proceed with their reply speech and conclude the debate. Please welcome.
Okay, I assume my Wi-Fi is okay. I'll just speak like this. If the previous speaker was okay, then it should be fine. One second. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Security is useless if the provision of security was the very reason the robber came to your house to begin with. 2 callouts, then 2 analysis as to where we've already won this debate. First, I think just want to tackle this very quickly, this weird argument that comes up from Sarah, that is responded to, mind you, both by myself and Vignesh, that just doesn't get a lot of engagement, right? The fact that if people love Russia, they're going to be infiltrating and it's dangerous during wartime. First, this argument is contingent on there being war, insofar as the entire Gulf case contains on the fact that conflict is unlikely to happen. The benefits of this debate, the benefits of this argument just doesn't materialize. But secondly, even if this is true, if they love Russia, I am unsure as to why Russia is then going to be attacking a very strategic trading partner for them. And number 2, why necessarily the Russian influence within these countries are a bad thing. Note, the entire debate they've been arguing that Russian influence within these countries are bad. But insofar as we've never said that this Russian influence looks like directly sending military individuals on the ground and oppressing people, I'm unclear why this influence is necessarily something that's incredibly harmful. We've already characterized to you from my speech that this influence is likely going to be economic in general. I'm unsure why this is terrible in nature. This is something that they don't agree on. Therefore, two layers here. First, I think when does First, when does Russia attack? And secondly, on membership. First, on when does Russia attack? Don't let Haikal gaslight you. Both cases are very contingent on the conflict thing. No team can win without proving whether conflict exists or does not exist within the region, right? Every argument is just NATO needs to protect individuals because conflict happens, or NATO doesn't need to protect individuals because they are the reason of conflict. Insofar as the team that claims conflict is the team that wins the debate, I don't think Haikal can allow himself a backdoor out of this clash, right? Therefore, when does Russia attack? Let's see what they say, right? They say 3 reasons why Russia will attack accent of Ukraine. Number 1, resources. Number 2, oligarchs. And number 3, influence. Judge, you can Google this. First, I'm unsure where resources exist. Insofar as they exist within the Caucasus, within Russia, and Belarus within gas, I'm unsure as to why they are invading Hungary for resources that just don't really exist within the region. Number 2, oligarchs. I'm unsure why oligarchs care about the Soviet Union as an ideology. Most likely, oligarchs care about money. If Russia goes to war, they get sanctioned, they got no money. I don't think oligarchs want this. And number 3, on influence. Besides this being new material coming out from Adam's speech, I'm unclear as to why these are bad. If the point in which Russia influences these areas in terms of economic policy and doesn't put military troops on the ground, something that they have not proven that occurs, I'm unclear as to why then this arbitrary notion of Russian influence is something that's so bad. Why then does necessarily NATO is an inciting incident or inciting force for Russian aggression? They assert that NATO is not the cause of these kinds of things. I've proven to you multiple reasons to track where conflict happens. First, in Crimea, where NATO was there first offering Ukraine membership back when Russia was kicked out of G8. These were problems that existed. Secondly, NATO offering membership to Georgia, which is why Russia cracked down on the region. Third, NATO offering membership to Ukraine at the point in which Russia then invaded. Fourth, in NATO penetrating Central Asia, which is why the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan was heavily incited by Russia. And 5, on Finland, when NATO was increasingly offering membership to Finland, that's why Russia felt threatened, not because they wanted to reclaim former area of the Soviet Union. Note, Finland's not a Soviet state or ever has been a Soviet state. All these reasons already came out in the substantive speeches that we talked about, proving to you why, when Russia attacks, NATO is always there, but NATO is always there first. At a point in which NATO does not exist or is not present in the region, there is no incentive for Russia to engage beyond the things that we've told you that it doesn't happen. But secondly, on membership, I think the worst case where Russia does invade, now this is being very, very charitable, Russia does invade, the kind of unilateral aid and support and weapons can still be sent as in the status quo, which will be happening on both sides of the house. But the point at which you actively engage in expansionary tactics as NATO, that's when you breach the principle in which you were founded on. You breach the principle on which you were substantiated on, you want to protect your own member states instead of being aggressive. You want a side that actually de-escalates conflict within the region. So proud to propose.
Thank you to the representative from the government team for the speech. We are now reaching the end of our session today. Congratulations and thank you to all debaters from both teams for a wonderful, informative and fruitful speech. For information, this round 4, is a silence round. Therefore, there will be no verdicts and comments as well as results given by the judges. Instead, the results will be announced in the next announcement session, which is scheduled to take place at 4:45 evening later today. All of you here are invited to join the session using the delete pengumuman keputusan. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the photography session, and therefore, to all educators and debaters, please kindly turn on your camera. Mr. Wesley Wong, can you open your camera? All right, Dato' Wesley Wong, can you open your camera? Okay. 1, 2, 3. One more time. 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you. We may dismiss the room. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And
Thanks, guys.